So I think you should all probably heard the story about the fellow who's taking a nice walk through the woods. Just a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Suddenly, out of nowhere, comes this grizzly bear chasing the guy. And he runs for his life. He doesn't know the woods very well, and he's just running like crazy. And he doesn't know that there's a precipice. And he follows this trail, and suddenly, boom, he finds himself falling. And in just trying to rescue himself, he grabs onto this little root that was sticking out there, and he's holding onto the root. And the root is kind of beginning to give way. And you know, those are the good times to pray, right? And so he says, "Dear God, please help me." And suddenly from the skies a booming voice comes out. And it says, "My son, let go. I will hold you in my loving arms." The root is beginning to give way a little more, you know, and he's kind of breathing. He looks up again. He says, "Is there anybody else up there? Can I have a second opinion on that, please?" So as I mentioned, today our message kind of morphed into the idea of guidance. And wisdom and guidance. Wisdom, our ability to make wise choices. And we know that our life basically is based upon choices, made or broken through the choices that we make, right? Is this the right person to hire? Is this the right career path for me? Who am I going to confide in? You know, how much freedom should I give my children at the age that they're at? Is this the person to get in relationship to, or is this time to get out of the relationship? You know, all kinds of questions come up, and we're always wanting guidance. Now, most of our decisions, my guess is, they come pretty easily. Our choices, decisions, they come pretty easily. Most of them are probably on good moral ground. They're probably on good legal ground as well, I would guess, for most of us. Nevertheless, how wise are our choices? You know, how much in alignment with your highest self are those choices? I believe that we all need guidance. The word for guidance in the Bible, the ancient Aramaic language, the word guidance was related to the word rope. Because in those days, ropes were used for navigation. And the ropes were pulled, and they were, you know, so to set the sails. And when you set the sails, you go in a direction. So when you're directed, you're sort of guided. So guidance and ropes were sort of used. And so the idea for us is we all need God's navigation through the turns of life. And so today we are going to consider three aspects. This is sort of the general theme that we're going to do. We're going to consider three aspects of guidance. What is God's guidance? How does God guide us? And after all, what is the purpose of God's guidance? Okay? We'll begin with the first one. What is God's guidance? And what I'd like to talk about today is two different aspects of what God's guidance is. The paradoxical quality and the non-obvious quality. Let's start with this paradox, okay? Basically, there are two schools of thought on this. The choices in life. You know, we like to say that, you know, we don't just let life happen to us. We believe in strategic planning of our life. We believe in goal setting. We believe in setting the prize and working toward it. We don't believe in just going on randomly through life. We believe in holding to an idea, a goal, you know, something that we want. We believe that we make decisions in favor of those, right? So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought says that basically everything is predetermined. The Bible tells us that a leaf doesn't fall from a tree without God being aware of it or letting it happen. So basically, God is in control of everything. So it really doesn't matter what you choose because everything is kind of predetermined. God has already got a plan for you. So just get into God's plan and everything's going to be all right. Two schools of thought, you see. And we have some examples, some testimony about how these play out. The first one, in the predetermined camp, we have our old friend Oedipus. You remember Oedipus, right? Oedipus gets a very clear prophecy when he's a young man. He is told You will kill your father. They're from the ancient Greek, right? Ancient Greek. You will kill your father and you will marry your mother. Oedipus says, forget that. I don't want any part of that. And so Oedipus chooses to not fulfill that prophecy. He makes very clear and conscious decisions to not have that prophecy played out. And in the end, he killed his father and married his mother. So Oedipus is telling us, forget it, but no matter what you do, it's going to work out the way God wants anyway. All right, that's the predetermined camp. Now, from the other deep wisdom of modern day prophecy, we have Doc Brown speaking to Marty McFly from the third of the Back to the Future. Your future is whatever you make it, Marty. So make it a good one. Right? He's telling us your future is what you decide it needs to be. So make it a good one. Right? So we have these two camps and we have these messages. And they seem like totally opposite. But I said this guidance has this paradoxical quality. Paradox being something that seem opposite, but in truth are not. In order for us to understand the paradoxical quality, we need to go into that second part, which I call the non-obvious. And the story of Joseph here is perfect. Joseph was raised in a household in which he was the favorite son. And he was kind of spoiled. And he grew up kind of arrogant and kind of self-centered and look at me and I'm the greatest and I'm the best. And I got this wonderful coat. His brothers got so angry with him that they took him out into the field, they beat him up and they left him for dead in a ditch. Well, wouldn't you know that some caravan came by and pulled him out of the ditch and healed him and took him away as a slave. So Joseph lived his life as a slave, and then because of certain circumstances he was taken out of slave and he became a very high place in a very rich man's house. And then after that, the wife of this guy accuses him of sleeping with her. He's thrown into jail again. He comes out of jail, and then this happens. And then he's got these highs, he's got these lows. He's got these highs, he's got these lows. Right? It's kind of like our life. Right? We got great moments, and then we got some really challenging moments. Well, Joseph was really all these highs and lows. At any point in his life, you asked him, hey, you know, how's God guiding you in your life? You know, if you're sitting in a jail cell or if you're a slave, you're going, well, it's not going so good. But he ends up being the right-hand man of the Pharaoh, the most powerful man in all of Egypt. And wouldn't you know it, his brothers back in the land where he came from, they had a famine. They had to go down to Egypt to see if they could get some food because they were starving to death. And who do they have to see but Joseph himself? And he looks upon them, and he remembers his brothers, and he says to them the famous words that are here. What you did, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And here Joseph is giving us basically the idea of how God's guidance can be non-obvious to us, depending upon the point in time that we choose to look at it. You know, we ask ourselves, why am I going through this so difficult situation right now? It's not obvious to me. When we consider, you know, what guidance is, what God guidance is for us, we need to remember that there's an overriding principle that works in our life. The reason we have this paradoxical quality is because our decisions do matter. They are important for us. But there is underneath that or beyond that something deeper and greater that does not change. And that is the truth of who we are as spiritual beings. That will never change. No matter what we do in life, no matter what decisions we take in life, the idea that we are one with God, that our soul is eternally in that oneness will never change no matter what we do. So if we understand that there is only one presence and one power in my life and in the universe, God is absolute good. That's the first tenet in unity. If we believe that, if we buy into that, then we're one with that absolute good. And no matter what we do, there's always a path for growth, for good in our life, you see. So the reason it's not obvious is because we're not trusting enough. This idea really points to the idea of trust. It invites us to know ourselves a little better. You know, when I was thinking, when I was about 20 years old, I was thinking about some of the decisions that I was making in my life. And I think, rough calculation, I figured that about 2/3 of my choices were not for my highest good. Right? I remember going to a party. I saw this one young lady dancing. I said, ooh, that lady is for me. Right? I did everything that I could to woo her, you know, to get into a relationship with her. She had nothing to do with me, and I was convinced that she was the one. Later on, I discovered some things about her that sort of proved to me that that would have been a disaster. Right? Thinking about my 40s, I'm figuring my percentage got a little better. Maybe I'm up to 50-50 in my 40s. Well, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm asking myself, I wonder what my percentage is these days. It's got to be somewhere in there, right? It's got to be some percentage. Maybe I've passed the 50-50 point. I don't know. But what I'm saying here is that what God guidance is first of all, non-obvious. Because we do go through these ups and downs. And it is paradoxical. Both are true. It's important that we get clear on what's important, our priorities, our goals, what it is that we want from life, from the highest point of view. And beyond all of that, whatever happens, it's meant for good. Right? You can say to life, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So, how does God guide us? First of all, you pay the price. And the second thing is you develop wisdom. Now, in the idea of paying the price, you need to consider Proverbs. Proverbs is considered one of the books of wisdom of the Bible. This is from the Old Testament. And here's a sentence that you read, and if you don't really take time to savor it, you kind of say, oh yeah, I know that. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. However, it is sentences like this. It's kind of like hard candy. It's not meant to be chewed, you know. It's not meant to be swallowed all at once. It's meant to be held in the mouth and kind of savored for a while. So you take a sentence like this and you kind of savor it for a while, and you realize that this is a radical sentence. This is telling us to live our life contrary to what you normally might think. Look at that. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Don't we want to live first with plans, and then we go to deeds? This is telling us commit our deeds to the Lord, and somehow our plans will work. Do you see how that's a complete reversal to kind of what we've been taught? It's a complete reversal. Plan your deeds, and your plans will somehow be elevated. There'll be more wisdom in your plans. Well, what is that all about? Well, this wonderful woman, Elisabeth Elliot, wrote this book on guidance. Wonderful book if you want to get more into the idea of guidance. And in this book she says, you know, the more amount of money you pay for advice, the more likely you are to follow it. You know, if you go and you spend a couple bucks on a magazine, you want to lose some weight. You need to read, you read an article, how to lose weight. You spend a couple bucks, you read the article, you say, yeah, no, maybe, yeah, who knows, right? You're trying to do something, you ask a friend. You get some free advice. Well, again, it might be all right, might not. Now you get into some trouble where you really feel you need some expert advice. You got to pay a lot of money for the expert advice, right? So you invest heavily in that advice. When the advice comes, you're really going to look at it, right? You've really invested in this. Ultimately, however, you're going to choose. This is right for me or not, right? You still have that ability to choose, but having invested so much, you're really going to listen to it. And what Elisabeth Elliot says is, we don't come to God for advice. We come to God for guidance. Guidance is like, whoa, way up the bar from advice. We want some certainty. We want some clarity. We want to know. And she says, in order for us to receive that guidance, the price we have to pay for that is astronomical. In fact, it's the highest price that we pay. What is it that we pay for guidance? It's denial of self. Denial of self. It kind of works like this. When I first heard the call to ministry, right, you remember that song, "Here I am, Lord, send me. I'll hold your people in my heart." I said, "God, send me wherever you want. I'm here to serve my people, your people, right? I am your servant." And there was a secret fear inside of me that God was going to send me to Thailand. I was going to have to shave my head, put on a purple robe or orange robe, walk around barefooted with a begging bowl, right? I was fearful that that would be what God would call me to do. Well, later on I found out what I was really called to do. You know, when I made some decisions that ended up hurting people, and I needed to take responsibility for that. And I needed to make amends for the pain that I had caused these people, right? And I'd speak honestly to them. Well, the part of me that I was denying was the part of me that wanted to forget that, not see that part of myself, not take responsibility for it, not open my heart to love myself in spite of all that. And the courage to be able to speak to somebody and said, "I have committed an error and I'd like to apologize." Wow, something in my personality died. But some part of my individuality, some part of my Christ nature stepped forward. I had to deny a smallness, an ego attachment, so that something greater could come forth. You remember the rich young man in the Bible comes to Jesus and says, "How can I get into the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus says, "Go sell everything you got and follow me." And the young man goes away sad. He goes away sad because he was so attached, not only to his possessions, but his idea of himself as a rich young man. Jesus is saying, you need to let go of your identification as a rich young man. You need to deny that part of self, because the riches that I have, you will not be able to imagine until you release that image of yourself. You need to deny that aspect of yourself so that you can come into a greater awareness of who you really are. Do you see that? So that's the price that we have to pay. Now that's a very high price. And I'll just remind you, as we go to pay that price, how is it that we can come to know then the right decisions that we're going to make? I've shared this with you before in the Conversations with God series, author Neale Donald Walsch. He has a conversation with God, and he's asking God the question, what about God's will? What's all this business about God's will? And in the book, Neale has a conversation with God, right? Neale speaks and then God speaks, right? So in my answer to that, I'll be God and you'll be Neale, okay? So here's what God says. God says to Neale, your will is always my will. That means no matter what you choose, that's what I want for you. Wow. You choose the best for yourself or you choose the worst for yourself, God says, that's what I want for you. I want you to have the freedom to choose absolutely. But, God says, my will, God's will, is not always your will. So what he's saying to Neale is, look, when it comes time for an important choice, get into your heart and think what would be the highest expression. Look at yourself as the highest expression of who you are and make a decision based on that. Your best you. What would your best you do? What would your best you decide? Right? And so that's what exactly we're talking about here today. As we develop the wisdom, we have this dynamic. I make a choice. And let's suppose that it goes well for me. Let's suppose I've got into my heart and I've decided on this path and it goes well for me. And because I made a conscious decision of coming from that highest thinking, that highest prayer activity that I have, and it goes well for me, I am confirmed in my trust for God. I say, God is with me. Thank you, God. I feel good because I somehow followed God's guidance and good was established. And so my trust in God goes up because everything went well. Well, let's suppose you take another decision and things don't go well, right? Well, things don't go well. You made your best choice. Things go terrible. And suddenly you feel abandoned by God. All this God business doesn't work. This God thing just doesn't work for me. But you have enough trust to say, I'm going to stay the course. Even though I can't see it right now. Even though it's not readily obvious. I'm going to stay the course. I'm going to stay with God. I'm going to know that there is good in here somewhere. And I'm going to continue to affirm that there is some good here. That maybe I saw some expression for evil, but ultimately there's good in it. And when the good is revealed to you, when you see and understand that some time later, you'll say, wow, I really was being guided. This really did work out, right? And so again, your trust in God is confirmed and grown, right? And so we have this dynamic. Basically, we grow in trust for God, which is everything that we're talking about regarding guidance. Here's a guidance formula. This was for the kids, but here it is for you. Don't go home and say, he talked about guidance but didn't get clear. Okay, here it is, clear. Formula. 1, 2, 3, all right? How do you get guidance? Divinely directed experience. What do I mean by that? You have a decision to make. You get into your heart. You contemplate yourself as the highest vision of the highest version of who you are. What would be the highest action, thought that you could do based on this? What would be the greatest example of you showing up and doing something absolutely fantastic? Divinely directed experience, and you take that action. It's not just about plans, it's about the action. You add to that trust. No matter what the apparent outcome of this action, I'm going to trust that it's all for good. You see, I'm going to just trust that it's all for good. And over time, then, I'm going to see that my trust in God has grown. So when we go back to Proverbs, and they say, let your mind, let your deeds, let your work be led by the Lord. That's what we're talking about. Let those deeds be inspired, but go ahead and do them. Sometimes people come to me in counseling and they say, well, I have a decision to make. I don't know if I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. I'm feeling some peace around this or I'm not feeling some peace around that. Usually my response is, well, let's get into a prayerful consciousness. Let's get into the highest expression of what you can think of. What would be the highest thing that you could do? What would be the best thing that you could do? Even though you may not feel peace about it. Go ahead and do it. Take action. And as you do, have trust that it's all going to be okay eventually. You'll be able to see it eventually. That's why the time factor is in there. Now this is the third part of our talk today. What purpose does God's guidance serve? And there's a story of David. David is on the run from King Saul. He's upset King Saul. King Saul's after him. And David consults the Urim and Thummim, which was basically a way to get some prophetic guidance. The Urim and Thummim gave 3 possible answers. Yes, no, or there's no clarity. Right? 3 possible answers. Right? And so David consults the Urim and Thummim, and Urim and Thummim, he asks the question, I'm on the run from Saul. Is this town that I'm going towards, is this a town where people are going to betray me? Are they going to give me up to Saul? And the Urim and Thummim says, yes. So David doesn't go to that town. He goes to another one where he's going to be safe. He'll be able to hide. Now you hear a story like that, and you might say to yourself, now that's what I'm talking about. I want that, right? I want to know, is this job going to be good? Is this idea going to be good? Is this person going to be good, right? I want to know yes, no, or, I want that kind of guidance. But what's true about that is that it's very immature spiritually. Very immature. For example, you have a 4-year-old son. About 5 o'clock, comes up to you and says, I would like to go out and play. And you say, well, we're going to have dinner soon, so go out and play, but just stay in the front yard. Don't go beyond where I can see you, okay? Child goes out and plays. Fast forward 16 years. 20, he's 20 now. He's off to college somewhere. About 5 o'clock, he calls you and he says, hey, there's some guys playing Frisbee in the courtyard. I'd like to go out and play with them. Could I go out and play? And you say to him, what is the matter with you? How am I supposed to know your responsibility? You know how much work you have. You know what you need to do. How am I supposed to know if you can go out and play or not? You wouldn't want your 20-year-old to be asking if you can go out and play. Very immature, right? So, we have to understand that there's a purpose here. Another example. I lived in Costa Rica in a house that had a little patio, and this little patio had a little tree. We had some chairs there. Wonderful place to read, to meditate, to look at the sun, the moon, whatever. And I noticed as I was sitting there that a bird had started making a nest. So I was fascinated watching this bird make this nest, working all day long to make the nest, and this or that. And then just as the nest was getting kind of ready and together, suddenly a cat appeared. And the cat, jumped over the fence and was looking and was just waiting. Was waiting for the bird to get into the nest, maybe have the egg, and I could see the future, right? So when the bird went away to get another branch, I went over to the nest and I destroyed it. Bird came back, was all angry. If it was me, oh my God, everything's been taken away. This is not fair. This is not good. God is smiting me. But I knew that if the bird continued to make a nest there, it wasn't going to go well for the bird or for the offspring. I knew it wasn't going to go well. So I had a higher vision, you see. Now, if you're a parent, there comes a time when your child is kind of testing the limits, their own boundaries, and you might put a boundary on them, and they may turn to you, and they may say, you are really bad. You're a bad person because you're not letting me do this. Some of you are smiling. I guess you've had that experience like myself, right? So, and you get angry. And what you want to say is, if you knew how much I loved you, if you knew all the sacrifices I've made for you, if you knew how much I want your best interest in mind, you would not be angry with me. So what is the purpose of guidance? God wants us to be godlike. God wants us to have the Christ mind so that we are absolutely aware of absolute good in every circumstance that we have. When we continue to make decisions, have trust, know that all things work together for good, then over time, yes, our plans do become clearer. There's more wisdom in choosing. The Proverbs was right. We take action. We learn from them when they don't go so well. We learn from them when we go well. It's all ultimately a growth experience. So just to summarize, guidance. What is God's guidance? Well, it's paradoxical and it's not obvious. Both are true. We have a predetermined reality, the Christ nature which doesn't change, and our decisions and our choices are very important. How do we get God's guidance? Well, we pay the price. We pay the price and we develop wisdom by taking effective action and remembering that all things work together for good. And what is the purpose? To put on the Christ mind, to be the Christ in expression, to have that greater vision of all and everything working together for good in our life. And that, my friends, is guidance. God bless you. Amen.